Welcome back to Life's Cholent. My name is Avital. As you may know, the goal of this YouTube channel is to make Judaism more accessible and easier to understand for all Jews, or for Jews who are just looking to find a connection between old Jewish concepts and modern life. And with that end, today we have a very special guest on this channel, which is Reb Noam Horowitz. Reb Noam was my teacher, my rabbi in high school, and continued to be a mentor and a role model after high school. He and his wife Yael are two of the kindest people you will meet. They have opened their home to so many people for meals, for learning, for studying, just to gather and have a place to hang out. They are always looking to help where they can in the community, and it's such an honor to have him today. Currently, Reb Noam is the Mashgiach Ruchani at Yeshivat Or Chaim in Toronto, which is a Mashgiach Ruchani is a spiritual counselor, and he is also the rabbi at Kehillat Aiyn L'Tzion. The topic of today's discussion is going to be what it means to be a rabbi and a little bit about sort of the history of being a rabbi, where the idea of having a rabbi originated from, what it looks like today, and we get some really wonderful, wonderful wisdom and insights from Reb Noam. So it is a true pleasure to have him, and without further ado, here's the interview. Welcome back to Life's Cholent. My name is Avital, and today I have the honor of speaking with my former teacher and rabbi, Reb Noam Horowitz, who is the Mashgiach Ruchani at Yeshivat Or Chaim in Toronto, and also the rabbi at Kehillat Aiyn L'Tzion. Reb Noam, thank you so much for being here today.
Avital, thanks so much for having me. It's really a tremendous pleasure to be here, to see you, to talk to you a little bit, and to all those out there, just that you guys should know how amazing of a student, and really I'd even say chavruta, which is a study partner that Avital was and continues to be in her approach and methodology of learning.
Well, thank you. I definitely paid him to say that beforehand. Before we get started into the meat of today's discussion, I thought it would be a good idea to start with the basics. So you could explain to us what is a rabbi, and so what does it mean to be a rabbi?
It's a great question, and like many things, especially in Judaism, it probably depends who you ask. But the word rabbi or rav really means master or teacher. So essentially what a rabbi is supposed to be is really a teacher, somebody who teaches others, and I would think helps people access information. Very often and classically and historically, rabbis were they were community leaders, but part of the rabbi's, I guess, focus or job was to be the one who is most knowledgeable and about Torah matters and halacha, or Jewish way of life, so that people are able to access information when they want to know what the Torah law or perspective is on something, and depending on which synagogue a person goes to, the rabbis may be doing different things there. It could be that in one place the rabbi's main job is to be a living encyclopedia of Judaic knowledge. It could be in a different place the rabbi's number one job is to inspire and motivate and help people connect. And in some places, the rabbi's number one job might simply be to be not simply, but to be the program director and to help, create great programming to help people engage in the holidays and in Shabbat and in prayer. And in many places, the rabbi is all of the above or some of the above. So a rabbi can have many different jobs, but in my opinion, the number one job is to be a teacher and to help people access Torah knowledge.
That's a great answer, and I think we will get into a little bit later some of the different roles that a rabbi can play within the Jewish community. But before that, how did you decide you wanted to become a rabbi? What did that process look like for you in terms of, what you had to study or different positions you had along the way?
For me, it was somewhat of I don't know if it was a full-on decision that just at one moment I was like, I want to become a rabbi. It was kind of something that I eased into and just felt right. That already when I was in I'd say growing up, I had always enjoyed and was interested in intellectual pursuits and felt somewhat connected to my Jewish heritage and to prayer and to Torah learning. I wasn't necessarily a super tzaddik or a super righteous all the time in my approach, but I definitely enjoyed and valued Judaism and Torah. And already when I was in university, I started part-time teaching in a high school. It was actually my old high school. I started just giving, like going in on Fridays and giving a teaching with a group of boys that were interested in some extra learning. And after university, it kind of um, just segued into a part-time job at the school and then a full-time job. So I definitely did not go straight into what you might classically call the rabbinate. I was not a shul rabbi, or I didn't have a pulpit, but teaching just it felt something. It felt right, and I generally, when I have information that I'm passionate about and that I feel strongly about and that I enjoy, I take tremendous pleasure in sharing it with other people. So teaching is an enjoyable passion for me. Thankfully I'm able to get paid doing it too. But I don't view it as work. I view it as just a life passion.
Well, that's wonderful. And he is a very good teacher for everybody out there. I know firsthand. As you sort of alluded to when you were explaining what a rabbi is, it's interesting because, from my understanding at least, the position of a rabbi didn't really exist till after the destruction of the Second Temple, when there needed to be somebody, a leader in the community, who could speak about different halachic, which means legal issues, or interpreting the Jewish law. So how has the position evolved in the sense of, now, as you were saying, you can find rabbis as teachers, you can find rabbis as congregational leaders, some rabbis serve on Jewish courts. Why do you think there was such an evolution over time of the position of rabbi? And even if you take it way back, some people think of sort of Moses, the leader of the Jewish people, almost as the first rabbi in a sense, because it was his students who became the leaders in their own times. So going back to Moses in a sense, why has the position evolved over time?
Amazing question. I don't know that I could give a complete answer. I'm not a super expert in the entire historical development of what maybe we'll call the title rabbi. But as you alluded in talking about Moshe, so we often refer to Moshe as Moshe Rabbeinu. Rabbeinu meaning our teacher. And we don't call him Moshe the Tzaddik or Moshe. We don't even, he was, we refer to him as our greatest prophet, but we don't refer to him as Moshe the prophet or Moshe the righteous or Moshe the pious. We call him Moshe the teacher, Moshe our teacher, because that's really the way seemingly that he viewed his role was to, and his perhaps his number one role in taking us through the desert was also bringing the Torah up from Mount Sinai and bringing the information of the Torah down to the people, and throughout the desert exposing the people to the beauty and information of the Torah and the law. And Torah law, even though on the one hand can seem somewhat simplistic, but it's also can be very complicated, because if you look in the text of the Torah, there are many laws that are somewhat ambiguous, and there are many laws where details are totally left out. So we actually, the written law is really only one part of the Torah that we believe was given at Mount Sinai. There was also a verbal component that we call the Torah Shebaal Peh, or the oral law, which is a mixture of explanation, legislation, details, ways in which the Torah can be applied, the applications, and the adaptations to various different new situations. So, for example, Shabbat, the Torah basically just says, don't do work on Shabbat. It gives two examples, but otherwise there aren't that many details. And if you look in some, whether in the Talmud or through other halachic or legal works, in terms of the various different laws of Shabbat, there are thousands of different laws. Where does all that come from? So at least a portion of those laws are believed, at least from the Orthodox tradition, to have been given down at Har Sinai to Moshe, and he passed it on to others as well. But for that to be passed on properly, you need experts, and to create experts, you need teachers from one generation to the next, and then passing down to the next. So I'd say in the beginning, the number one role of the rabbi may have been actually to really be the teacher of all the details of the verses from the Bible and how to understand them in a practical legal way, because we didn't have the amount of text that we have nowadays, and through various different generations that developed and adapted more and more. And even now, when we have books and books and books and books and texts and texts and texts that have much information, we still have new questions that are constantly arising. Even an expert, not that I'm an expert, but I call myself rabbi, and there are people who call me rabbi, and when questions come to my attention, there are rabbis that I go to. So you also have rabbis of rabbis, because there are certain things that you need real experts on the history of halacha and the way halacha adapts to new situations. I won't give any examples of it right now, but a great a macro example where rabbis are looking to greater rabbis has been the past 8 months during the coronavirus, and various different halacha questions that are coming up and seem somewhat unprecedented, and what to do in those cases. So I've been consulting with other rabbis, and some of those rabbis are even consulting with other rabbis on how to adapt to our current situation.
Well, that was a great answer, and a great example also with the coronavirus and needing to find other leaders who are more knowledgeable in specific subject areas. And in a way, that's sort of where some of the delineation of rabbis comes from, is that each one, I guess, in their process of studying to become a rabbi, many choose like an emphasis of study. Is that correct?
There are many who do. There's general study to have basic breadth of Torah knowledge, and certain areas where, depending on the type of rabbi that the person is planning on becoming, certain areas of expertise. For example, community rabbis have to be very adept at life cycle events, and we don't want to have to. And hopefully situations don't come up so often, but to be experts in the laws of burial and mourning, and learning how to deal with tragedy, both from a halachic perspective and also just from a counseling perspective, and how to be there for families, and how to be there as a supporting community leader for families, what to do at bar mitzvahs and weddings, and how to make sure that the wedding is following certain laws to make sure that it's what we might call a kosher marriage. So a community rabbi who's really running the community has to be knowledgeable in all of those areas. There are those who might have a strong focus in the halachot of Shabbat or the halachot of kosher, and that way, if any questions that somebody might come up, that might come up for someone who wants to be strict on the laws of kosher, they go to the rabbi and ask. So generally, community rabbis will study all of those areas, but then you also have rabbis who might become experts in depth in certain areas if they might be sitting on a court. So you might have certain civil legal matters, which only certain rabbis. Those are the ones that you go to. There are some rabbis who are experts in the area. Again, we don't necessarily wish it upon anybody, but a very important area of the areas of divorce, and the full breadth of Jewish life. You have rabbis who are definitely experts more in certain areas, but there's some basics that pretty much every rabbi should learn and should be aware of, so that they can properly teach and run their communities, depending on again, what their jobs are. Somebody who's a classroom teacher but doesn't run a community, they might not need to know, at least for others, some of those halachot as much. But it might depend on what the person's role in the community is.
That makes a lot of sense. And one of your roles is as a congregational rabbi, a rabbi of a synagogue. So do Jewish people need a rabbi to pray? And in general, what is the role of a rabbi in a synagogue?
Great question. So just to answer your first question, does a person need a rabbi to pray? The answer is absolutely unequivocally not. Everybody has a direct line to God, direct access to God, and nobody needs anyone else to be able to pray. And you can actually pray in any language. Most of our prayer books and sidurim in many synagogues will pray in Hebrew, but if a person doesn't know Hebrew and wants to talk to God in English, God knows English too. So as long as a person is genuine and really wants to talk to God and connect, a person could talk in any language at any time, anywhere. And God listens. God is there. So the rabbi is not necessary. However, the reason why many synagogues do have rabbis who are helping run the show is for a few reasons. So one is not necessarily for the prayer service itself, but just because they want a community rabbi. It could be mainly for other reasons, for the weddings and the funerals and other things that may come up. It could also be for the rabbi to help run the service. So once you do have people getting together for a service, and there might be certain halachot, certain laws involved in how the service goes, and when certain things are said, and when there's certain responses, and when there could be an interruption or not, and how the reading of the Torah goes, which reading of the Torah is not technically prayer, but there is Torah reading in many prayer services. The prayer and the Torah reading end up getting connected. So just having an expert in the room who knows how things should go, and especially if a question comes up, people know who to ask. There are also many who look to the rabbi for some level of inspiration or motivation and some insight into whether it's the prayer itself. It could be the weekly Torah portion, but there are many who come to hear the rabbi give some type of talk or sermon each week, and just to learn. So that gets back to our original definition of rabbi as teacher, is there are those who come to learn something or be inspired in some way, and for the rabbi to be there as an aid to help people connect during their prayers. But prayer could be both very communal and deeply personal at the very same time. And the rabbi's there just to help.
I always find a rabbi's presence in the shul to be very valuable, and especially for that guidance and for teaching, as you just said. Moving away from rabbis for a moment, something that happens in Jewish synagogues is called a minyan, and I was wondering if you could explain a little bit what a minyan is and what the role is of that in the synagogue as well.
Sure. So the word minyan literally just means a count, or a quota, a certain amount. So the word minyan could be employed in various different scenarios, but when we're talking about minyan for prayer service, so that's talking about 10 men above the age of bar mitzvah, at least in Orthodox circles. There in other synagogues, maybe conservative or reform, women might count for minyan as well. There may even be some places that minors, children under a certain age, could potentially count. So depending on where you go, the idea of minyan might mean something different. But it's a minimal amount to create a certain type of community. So it becomes a community davening as opposed to an individual davening. And once you have that minimal community, so now there are certain things that can be done in the service. So there's a group of, or category of prayer activities known as Devarim Shebekidusha, which literally means things of sanctification. And some of those things, many of those things can only be done with a minyan. So for example, many of your listeners might be at least aware of the concept of a kaddish. And there are different types of kaddishes, the Yitgadal, V'Yitkadash, Rabbi, and so on. Some that are said by the prayer leader, some that might be said by a mourner. So that is really only supposed to be said with the minyan. There's the idea of the Kiddusha, which is in the repetition of the Amidah, or the silent prayer that then gets repeated as a public prayer. So the Chazan's repetition. So that repetition is generally only done with a minyan, and the Kiddusha in it, which is a responsive piece, is also only done with a minyan. And there are certain other things as well that are only done with a minyan. Usually Torah reading is only done with a minyan. But the idea seems to be, once again, that even though prayer can be very personal and really just one-on-one, myself and God, but there also is a communal aspect that we have the community coming together to pray and praying for each other. And at least in classic Torah commentators view that actually as a higher level prayer service. That when we come together to pray, that it ends up either being received on a higher level or is viewed as a greater fulfillment of the obligation to pray.
Well, it's very interesting. So your other role outside of sort of this a congregational rabbi is, again, as this Mashgiach Ruchani, which is like a spiritual counselor. Am I translating that correctly?
Yeah, absolutely.
So as a spiritual counselor, what, if any, role does prayer play in sort of the way that you guide people spiritually?
It's a wonderful question. So I'd say that the way that I generally view my role as mashgiach is really just to be there for people, to be there as a support, and everybody connects spiritually on a different level, and everybody struggles with different things. And on the one hand, there's lots of patterns of struggle that people can relate to each other, but every person is an individual. They all struggle with different things, and I view my job not necessarily to tell people how to deal with it, but just to give them somebody to talk to when they struggle with, it could be belief, it could be something about theology, it could be a Jewish law, and it could be, and very often, especially with high schoolers, it's the concept of prayer. Prayer seems very rote. It's boring. It could be very boring, and very often it is. There are many that are brought up to pray in Hebrew, but don't really know what they're saying. So if I'm saying words and don't understand or connect to those words, that can make it very difficult to connect to what I'm doing. And what I try to do is just to be an ear for people to talk to, and to try to lend maybe some suggestions or try to see what direction a person wants to go in and help them in that direction. So if somebody's struggling through prayer and wants to be able to pray stronger or with a bit more emotional connection or devotion, so I try to help them connect. But my biggest thing as the Mashgiach Ruchani is I try to show them that I struggle just as much as they do, and just to be a relatable human being, and to maybe show them how I struggle and try to go through the journey of my struggles, and maybe somewhere in the way they see what I struggle with or think about, maybe they'll find something that they connect with. But in no way is it that I have all the answers and I tell someone, you've got a question, I've got answers, and that's it. It's, you have struggles, I have struggles, so let's struggle together and see where we get in our journey together.
Well, that's good advice. I think it is something for people who have been praying for a long time or who are just trying to start. It can be very challenging to stick with it. What's some advice maybe that you give to your students or to other people in general when they are struggling to connect to prayer?
If the struggle stems from belief, maybe it's just, I don't know if I believe in God. So if someone doesn't know if they believe in God, that can make it very hard to talk to God. So usually we have to, scale back and think about what our belief, our faith, our connection, and we'll discuss maybe a little bit, more about that, and just talk about God, and talk about, do we feel that God is present in the world, and get into some of those theological discussions. Very often it ends up just being that a student might just feel, sometimes it's just very practical and technical. I just feel tired in the mornings. During the morning prayer service, I went to sleep late last night. School starts at 7:40 in the morning, which means I had to be up at 6:30 to get here, get dressed and get here. And sometimes they're just tired and they don't necessarily have a fundamental argument. It might just be, I'm just not feeling it. And we try to push them and talk to them about, how can we feel it a little bit more? Or is prayer valuable enough for me that even if I feel tired, I'm still willing to do it? There are times when I often use the parable of or parallel of exercise, and there are times when I don't feel like exercising, and times when I feel exercise is very important, and I'll get up at 5 o'clock in the morning to exercise, and times when I just don't feel like it and I'm tired. And the question is, how valuable is exercise for me? And we could use many other examples too. How valuable is helping others? If I have a friend in need, am I willing to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning to speak to them? Am I willing to get up earlier for them? So how important is that to me? So sometimes the question is, how important is prayer for me in my life and in my daily routine? And am I willing to try it and go for it even when I don't feel like it or feel tired? Very often the advice is just simply, look in the English. It might be someone that's looking at the Hebrew and doesn't connect to it. So I tell them, look at the English. And sometimes the advice is, we have this whole prayer book and we follow a very specific routine, especially in the mornings. In our afternoon prayers, it's much shorter, so it's not as much of a struggle. But in the mornings, when we might take a full half an hour or even 45 minutes out of the morning before we even start classes. So there are times when I'll tell students, don't try to say everything. Just pick maybe one paragraph and really try to make that one meaningful. Or, think about, there is a bit of a hierarchy in the service on what we might call is a little bit more important, what might not be as important in terms of what's said. And you might tell them, let's focus on what we feel is the most important paragraph. And sometimes I'll tell them to forego that and say, don't worry about what I tell you is most important. Which one do you feel most connected to? And just go with that. And there are students that I have that don't connect to prayer really at all or saying the words. And I'll tell them, you know what? Close your eyes and meditate. Close your eyes, think, reflect. Maybe when we stand for a certain part, stand with us to show that you're part of the community. But if it's too hard to say the words, so I can't force a person to say words and can't force a person to connect. A person has to connect on their own. So depending on students and depending on the case, we try to guide them. But the main goal is that they think for themselves and they try to connect on their own and feel motivated. But we really like our students to come to it on their own and not to feel that the only reason I pray is because my rabbi tells me I have to pray or because my parents tell me I have to pray. It's important to respect parents and heritage. It's important to respect teachers and rabbis. But a person doesn't and shouldn't feel they have to pray just because someone else tells them to. And same thing, we could extend that to being religious in general. If I tell you something is true, and I would tell you know me on this, right? Just because I tell you it's true doesn't mean that you have to believe it's true. Okay? Believe me because you agree with that with what I'm saying, and as Avital also knows, and this is just as a quick sidebar, is as a teacher, I know I'm digressing a bit, but as a teacher, my goal is not to have students listen to me; it's to have students who are thinking. So the greatest pleasure for me as a teacher is when a student argues with me respectfully, but argues in a way that really challenges me. My Rosh Yeshiva and Rabbi in the yeshiva that I went to in Israel, in Yeshivat Or Chaim, Rav Lichtenstein. So he was quoted as saying that he doesn't want Hasidim, nothing wrong with being a Hasid, but doesn't want Hasidim At least nowadays, a chassid often means that they follow a Rebbe. Whatever the Rebbe says, I do. Chassid can mean many other things as well, but that was the context in which he was talking about. He said, I don't want chassidim, I want talmidim. I don't want followers, I want students. And he said, what's a student? A student challenges the teacher. So I don't know how I got here, but in terms of the conversation, but that's just, at least as a side point, is that it's important to think and that one feels connected on their own and not just because someone is telling them to connect.
I think that was a very valuable side note, so I appreciated it. And it was one of the things that always made you a standout teacher is that you were very open to your students' questions and you weren't afraid of them. You encouraged them, and I think that's what's one of the things that makes you a very effective teacher.
I have good students, so thank you.
Thank you. So going back to the role of a rabbi for a moment, for somebody who's just sort of going through the portal, entering into Judaism, why might finding a rabbi be something important or valuable to them?
I'd say for many people, it could be to have really to have a mentor or a guide. And with anything else, is that if I'm looking to grow in something, but I'm a beginner, and even if I'm an expert, we're always, compared to someone else, we're always going to be a beginner. So like I mentioned before, I view myself as a beginner in halacha, and a beginner in prayer, and a beginner in spirituality. And I have those who I look up to. But with anything else, it could be health, it could be medical things, it could be exercise, it could be art. But if I'm looking to grow in any of those areas, then I might look for someone who could train me in those areas and who could teach me and who could also, I might look for somebody to inspire me. Maybe I want to learn how to run a marathon, and if I don't know how to train properly, so it might be very difficult. So I might want to find someone who could really train me how to, how do I start off? Right now, I could barely run, a mile, and how do I build up to 26? Some experts might tell me you're not the right guy for it, and I don't know if I should give up just on that. But others might say, okay, we're starting from square one. It's going to be a long process. And they'll tell me, how I should eat properly and how I should run and train and on which days I should rest so that my body heals after running. And it might also be that person's, or I might view that person also as, after my first month, I've hit a wall and I just can't get past I built up to 4 miles. I can't get to mile 5 and I'm ready to quit. And I want my marathon Rebbe to get me over that hump, inspire me, encourage me, get me there. So for many, the rabbi is to inspire. A person might feel inspired. I want to become more spiritual. And it could be that after a few months of, their current journey of spirituality, the journey gets tough. So it could be that they look to their rabbi hey, rabbi, keep me going. And really, ultimately, it's up to that person. Person has free choice, and it's their decision to keep on going. But having a teacher, mentor, guide, motivator in anything in life is really important, but especially for Judaism and somebody who wants to start leading a Torah lifestyle, especially if it's going to be a halachically committed lifestyle, there's a lot of details to be aware of. And it can be a very long process to learn. So having the right teacher can be very, very important. And sometimes it could be different teachers could be best for different parts of the journey. Maybe this teacher is best for me as a beginner, and then maybe I move on to my next teacher. And then maybe I move on to my next teacher. Hopefully I can maintain relationships with all of them. But that also is an additional aspect of being the rabbi is the relationship and the relationship with congregants and with students and with community members, and that rabbi also helps that person feel that they're connected to something bigger, whether it's Torah ideology, it could be God, it could be the community, and all of the above. So having somebody that helps you connect, I think, is incredibly, incredibly important.
Well, I think I agree. I think that what you said was very wise. Any advice for people on how to find a rabbi, in the sense of, do they find somebody who they sort of connect to? Do they find somebody who's in close proximity to them? Do they find somebody who's in their same sort of religious denomination or group as them? And I don't know, like, what's the best way for somebody to find a rabbi when they don't have one?
In terms of the question of proximity, so proximity is very important, I think. But nowadays with technology, proximity is less important because you could be in touch with somebody every single day and live 1,000 miles away, or more. Or you could live on opposite sides of the world and that person could still be my main teacher. And you could have conversations and learn and study and send materials for study, through email and through text. And so in that sense, proximity might not be as important nowadays, although it might still be good depending on what leg of the journey a person is on, to have somebody accessible in the community. If I'm going to a synagogue in my community, so I would love to feel connected to that rabbi, or have a mentor to show me and help me with prayers and Shabbat and things like that. So I'd say that's important. I'd say the number one thing is somebody who I respect, and I respect their knowledge and their ideology, their approach. So it could be that even if the person is of, maybe I'm, let's say, a conservative Jew, but I found a Reform rabbi who I really respect and I love their approach. Great, right? I found somebody who I respect and who I could ask questions to, and I might start realizing that that's a Jewish person and I'm a Jewish person, and titles don't matter as much, and categories of Judaism, it helps us with certain things, but I'm not a big fan of labels. So I consider myself, I would label myself as Orthodox, but I have many conservative rabbis who I respect very, very much. And I have rabbis from other denominations who I might look to. It might not necessarily be that I'll look to them for every question I have, because there might be certain areas that we fundamentally disagree on, but I might look to them for other areas for advice, especially if it comes to pastoral counseling or, dealings with congregants. So anybody who deals with congregants could be in that conversation. It could be having somebody that struggles with prayer. Anybody that has people who struggle with prayer could be part of that conversation. So finding a rabbi who one respects, and I'd say trust is very important also. So if somebody has a position of power, there are those that manipulate that power. So if I know that I have a student who's primed for learning, and I'm not a good human being, and I call myself rabbi or any other title, so I could potentially misuse my title. So it's important to make sure that the rabbi is someone who we trust and who represents what I'm looking for. So if I'm looking for knowledge on halacha, so I should make sure that the person I'm looking to, I trust their knowledge and approach to halacha. If what I'm looking for is just understanding interpretation of biblical stories, so maybe I'd like to find someone who I trust and respect their approach to the biblical narrative. If I'm looking for someone who's going to give me, super inspiration on prayer, so I'm going to want somebody who understands the nature of prayer, understands what the words mean very well, and could really explain to me what am I doing when I pray. So that might be who I'm looking to for in terms of a teacher and rabbi. So for different people, it might depend on what they're looking for and where they're on in their journey. But in terms of where to find a rabbi, so it could be that you look to the local synagogue, a local school. It could be that I go on the internet and I, find a website where I, read various different articles, and I say, wow, this rabbi wrote this article. I really connect to that. So maybe I'll reach out to them. Most people are accessible through email or phone number. Maybe I'll listen to some classes from someone, and I feel very connected to the way they teach, and I'll want to connect to them that way. So there's various different ways of finding rabbis and accessing them. And it could also be that maybe I don't have such a strong religious background, and I'm view myself as a beginner, but maybe I have a friend who once upon a time invited me for a Shabbat meal, and I enjoyed that Shabbat meal, and I loved, the religious atmosphere of their home, and I might ask them. I might just ask them questions. It doesn't necessarily have to be somebody with a title rabbi. It could just be a person who I trust. So not specifically title rabbi. I don't know that we always have to get caught up in the title. But if I'm looking for maybe somebody who is more of an expert, maybe I'll just ask that person, hey, do you have a rabbi who you recommend for me? You know me well. You know what my needs are and what I'm looking for. Any chance you have somebody to recommend?
Those are some definitely some great tips, and I agree. I think that there can be multiple rabbis or people who you look up to in your life at one point in time or throughout your life, and that's kind of the beautiful thing about having a rabbi who's a teacher and who is aware of all the different stages of the life cycle, because it really, that person can be there for you throughout your life. So thank you so much. Those were all my questions. Is there anything else that you would like to add?
I'd say, and perhaps even for a different time we could follow up, but just back on prayer.
Mm-hmm.
So, and again, it could be a discussion for a different time and even with a different person. But I'd say something to ask about might just even be like, really, what is prayer? What is prayer, and what are we doing when we pray? And there are various different words in the Torah that we might use to indicate of various different aspects of prayer. But it begs even a bigger question of how do we relate to God, and how do we talk to God, and do we believe that we can change God's mind? Is prayer about convincing God of something? Is it about convincing myself of something? Is it supposed to be more of an introspective process? Is it a process of connecting and building a relationship? And it could be all of the above. So just something maybe I'll throw out just as a question for our listeners, that perhaps just something to think about on their own, and maybe we could follow up on a different time on what when you think about prayer, what does that mean to you? So not just, do I know how to pray? Do I not know how to pray? Can I go to a synagogue and know how to navigate the Siddur and follow what's going on? But what am I doing in the first place? Why am I here? And what is the concept of tefillah, which is the Hebrew word for prayer? What does that mean for me, and what are my goals when I pray?
Absolutely. I would love that. That sounds like a wonderful place to follow up with and to delve into, not just, like you said, not just the technical aspects of, here's the prayer book, this is where you go through, but the grander questions of why and how, and all of those elements, I think would be fascinating. And I think that would be something people would really enjoy learning, and I would enjoy hearing too.
Wonderful. Amazing.
Reb Noam, it has been such a pleasure to have you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today, and I look forward to continuing to delve into this discussion and to learn more from you.
Absolutely, Avital, and I really want to just thank you for the opportunity. I really view this as a tremendous opportunity, and just a really nice time talking to you, and speaking and chatting together a little bit. And I really hope that those who are listening out there, are learning something from what we discussed today. And also, if I officially give you permission that if anybody has any follow-up questions and would want to reach out to me, you could feel free to give out my email or even my number.
Thank you. I people should definitely take you up on that offer. You are a wonderful person to learn from. So thank you again.
For sure.